Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forage Focus 2022. My name is Terry Noon, and I am the chair of the Ontario Forage Council. This is the first of 3 webinars for this year's virtual conference. Thank you to the dairy farmers of Ontario, Kemin, Barenberg USA, SGS Canada, and GOForages.ca for their generous partnership of this year's webinar series. Today's webinar is quality nutritionist in the Department of Animal Science at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. She is a fellow at the Tata Cornell Institute for Agriculture and Nutrition, TCI, a long-term research initiative focused on solving problems of poverty, malnutrition, and rural development in India. Her program aims to improve the profitability of forage livestock operations while at the same time minimizing any negative effects of forage crops on the environment. Many of her studies have involved evaluating or improving laboratory or in vitro techniques to assess forage quality. The goal of this effort is to improve and standardize routine laboratory methodology. She has published over 250 peer-reviewed papers, chapters, and proceedings, and co-edited a popular book on forages, Grass for Dairy Cattle. Cherney received her PhD in animal nutrition from the University of Florida. At this time, I would like to pass it over to Dr. Cherney.
Hello, everyone, and I want to thank everyone for inviting me here. And I know you people who are listening out there, it takes a lot to come out and take out your time to do this when it's quite busy, I know, on your farms. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about grass and dairy cows, but I know a few of you are beef people or maybe pasture people, so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. New York has had a long experience with grass and alfalfa. Even though some people say they have pure alfalfa acreage, in actual fact, if you go out there, you'll see some grass. Basically, because we can't grow in New York, we have a lot of suboptimal soil drainage, which isn't great for alfalfa. Since we've been doing it for so long, they have a comfort level. We have a lot of research supporting alfalfa-grass. My husband and I have been doing that for 30 years here in New York, and there's some other researchers doing that as well, and we know in Canada as well. And there has been actually quality improvements in alfalfa and some in grass. So I'm going to just cover quickly some basics of fiber digestibility, because I know our speaker tomorrow is going to cover that a little bit more. I want to talk about some of the benefits of improved varieties versus some older commons, and some of our research, and if time allows, what we should be doing to build our forage programs. Okay, so what is fiber? The definition is it's the most common measure of fiber used for animal feed analysis, and it measures most of the structural components in the plant cells. But we started talking about digestible fiber because not all fiber is the same. This is what we would like it to look like up here in the corner. But we have competition down at the lower end. I have had some dairy producers, actually, they've made their alfalfa a little bit too good, their alfalfa-grass even, and so they're having to supply straw for their animals, and they have a little bit of competition because there's more and more straw being used for mushrooms and raised gardens and even a few houses here and there. So it's not something we want to really encourage producing. Okay, so what is fiber digestibility? It's a portion of the ingested fiber that winds up in the poop. This graph down here shows cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. Lignin can't be digested. So when you look over at the graph, cellulose is 100% gone. Hemicellulose is variable, but about 50%. And there is no little gray bar. That's because indigestible fiber is, well, lignin isn't digestible, and it actually holds up some of the hemicellulose. So when we talk about it, how does it impact the dairy farmer? Okay, a high digestibility forage, the animal can eat a lot of it. It breaks down very easily, and so it passes very quickly. So the animal kind of looks like this. As we get more fiber, low NDF digestibility, it means we have more lignin, more hemicellulose. Usually it's an older plant, but it can vary among species and even varieties. And this is what our cow can look like, that big old hay belly, or as we call it sometimes. And she can't eat as much. This takes a while for the microbes to break it down. And so she can't eat as much, not as much comes out the end. And as animal nutritionists, sometimes we like to say that the mammary gland drives the intake and not the other way around. So if she can't get that energy down to her mammary gland, the intake suffers. When we're talking about NDF digestibility, or maybe you've seen relative forage quality, if you have to buy some hay or milk per acre, and some of these, they are hard to use to identify a date of like when you would like to harvest a field or put animals out there, because the higher they are, the better. So it's hard to pick that. But for any class of nutrient, we can define an optimum NDF for when we either want to put them out on pasture or when we want to harvest for hay. And the numbers I'm going to give you are kind of for harvesting for hay, but so we can define it using NDF. We found that NDF and NDF digestibility are pretty highly, very highly correlated. And we found that to be about 50 to 55% NDF for grass, and 38 to about 40% for alfalfa, for lactating dairy cattle. And we don't really make a lot of hay in New York because it rains a lot when we're trying to make hay, and so most of our forage is put up in silage for our dairy cattle over the winter. Even if they're grazers, they're going to be putting some up for the winter, and then our confined feeding are going to be feeding silage as well. But this is the numbers, mostly bunk silos. Now, David Combs did some work. He's a dairy nutritionist at Wisconsin, and he estimated how much other materials that you could put in the diet if you had a low digestibility diet and then a high digestibility diet. And we said, okay, here's grass alfalfa. We're going to include it at, and this is to produce the same amount of milk. Grass alfalfa, say 50% in the diet, low digestibility. We have to add a lot more corn, soybean meal, and corn silage to get the same amount of milk as a higher digestibility diet where we could put in more forage, and then we can put in less corn and soybean meal. So it really helps in a number of ways. We have more homegrown forage. So from an environmental standpoint, that's going to be a little bit better. Also from our costs of bringing stuff in, it's going to be lower. Now, animals kind of sometimes, well, they want it to taste good, but as a nutritionist, I can, if I know the animal's needs, I can make a ration that'll work for them. My husband is an agronomist here, and it took me a few years to convince him, but you know, this is how I can get straw into the ration and still have them do quite well. But it said we can actually fit grass into rations in one of two ways. We know that we can grow the grass separately, and we do have quite a those fields in New York as well. And we can also grow the grass in mixture with alfalfa. And that's two very different things from an agronomist standpoint. So there's different things that we have to do. Okay, so we want to include both grass and alfalfa because it gives us higher total fiber than alfalfa alone. So we don't have those problems of having to go buy some other source of fiber. The fiber of grasses is more digestible than alfalfa, although remember, alfalfa does have a lower NDF. And we can normally reduce non-fibrous carbohydrates in our dairy rations. And some of the producers here in New York actually push their rations a little too hot. I think they are pushing it up around 40%, which can cause some sick cows. And so we'd rather see that a little bit lower. And grass does run a little bit lower in non-fibrous carbohydrates than alfalfa. So we can, if we can replace some of that alfalfa with the grass, we're in good shape. And we can also, New York has been using corn silage for many years. Even when Dwayne Roeder at Wisconsin made alfalfa the queen of forages, we didn't switch, so we used a lot of corn silage. And we can actually include a little more corn silage if we're using grass. And that also is one of the factors that we can reduce some of the other grains. Okay, so what are the advantage of grass? Okay, we get fiber in a smaller package, more room for grain if we want it. And or if you're just using grass, you're probably going to get a little bit more milk production out of it because at least if you do high digestibility, because they can eat more. And you're going to avoid a problem that we do have quite a bit here, and that's rumen acidosis. This was a study that Dave Combs did a while back, and he looked at replacing Italian ryegrass into the diet with instead of alfalfa, and those are the numbers. And I'm sure you can get a copy of these since it's being recorded, but you can see that the diets were formulated about the same and from a chemical standpoint, and we got the same amount of milk. We actually got a little higher on the fat content, but it can be done if it's managed right. Larry Chase at Wisconsin, or at Cornell here, worked with a lot of farms that just used grass forages, and he had a number of farms that he looked here, and you can see that there is some variation. We've got from 80 to 90 pounds of milk. Sorry, I didn't convert. But they were all eating pretty good. Those are all pretty good milk volumes, and they did use mostly grass in their ration, so they can get pretty high milk yield if it's alone. Now, what are we looking at if we plant grass alone? Okay, now, as it said, we have a lot of fields that are variable. We have many different soil types, and I came from Purdue, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana, and there the topsoil is very dark brown to almost black. It's very deep. There's not a lot of rocks, and it's very good soil. Okay, now in New York, we said if you don't like the soil you're on, walk 3 steps in any direction and you're going to have another soil type. So yields can be pretty variable. So if we plant grass, we seem to get more consistent yields, and we do get really high fiber digestibility. And another advantage for us is it typically will dry down faster for haylage or hay. Now, one of the forages that we've been looking at in the last couple of years has been meadow fescue. Now, Europe has over 120 meadow fescue varieties, and and also some meadow ryegrass in there, but it's one of the most used grass varieties and or species, and none of them were developed as a companion crop to alfalfa, and most of them haven't been evaluated in the United States. So that's kind of what we started looking at. Now, before that, we had done a few years of work with tall fescue, and we know we have a lot of varieties, and we know that a lot of tall fescue, the varieties that they have out there, some animals don't like grazing on them. They have produced some better ones, but when that tall fescue, regardless kind of a variety, is made into silage, they seem to eat it fine. Now, in pure stands, tall fescue gives us like a 10% higher yield than just about, well, certainly than meadow fescue. But if we put alfalfa in the mix, meadow fescue often gives us a higher grass percentage than the fescue, and meadow fescue exceeds the winter hardiness of tall fescue. It seems to be a little more drought tolerant. Its nutritive value exceeds that of tall fescue. Usually things are not perfect with any grass, so if you get one thing that's good, something else has to go down. So tall fescue, higher yield; meadow fescue, higher quality. And if you're doing it in a pasture, meadow fescue is a much softer grass, and the animals prefer to eat that. Now, this is a picture a couple of years ago. We had a drought, pretty good drought going on in some areas, And this is a field with meadow fescue in it. You can see there's quite a bit of alfalfa with the grass. With the tall fescue, it was in really, really bad shape. And these were kind of right next to one another. Okay, and this is some plot work that we did. We had some plots up in northern New York, and all these plots were on producer fields that they cooperated with us. So anybody out there that's cooperating with the scientists, I want to give you a very big thank you because it really helps with our data. And what we found is that when we looked at the NDF percent, we harvested these all on the same day. And what we tried to do is make sure that we harvested on the day that was most appropriate for harvesting, which if you're making hay, we consider the first leaf stage, or not the first leaf, I'm sorry, the stage just before you get the buds out, and or the inflorescence, and the flag leaf, that's what it was. I'm sorry, I forgot. Anyway, so there a lot of them were about 50%, which was where we're trying to get it. These down here, the tetrax, the Trecholonia, are the tetraploid fescues, meadow fescues, and they are lower in digestibility. So their quality is improved. So these guys would also have lower, higher neutral detergent fiber digestibility. We also did yield on these, and this was in northern New York, and we measured the yield for 4 cuts that we got there. And like in a lot of places, the yield was higher here in the first cut, although our second cut got quite a bit. This was more in central New York in 2021, a different year. We got the same type of data with the tetraploid varieties having the lower NDF, higher digestibility. And in this year, most of our cuts, we only got 3 cuts, and most of that was in the first 2 cuts. So alfalfa grass mixtures. Now what do? What are some of the pros? Okay, less alfalfa winter kill. We've had some problems in previous years with that because we get a lot of freezing and unfreezing, so that's not good for our alfalfa. But when you have the grass in there, it seems to protect the alfalfa. A longer stand life. In New York, sometimes our alfalfa stands don't last more than 2-3 years. So when we put the grass in there, it tends to last a little longer. There's less traffic damage because we don't have to go over it as many times. There's fewer pests and disease. We have improved soil health, less erosion. We often, because of the grass, we get higher yields and less animal disorders. The cons is you can get variable forage quality because depending on kind of what the situation is from year to year, the amount of grass is going to vary quite a bit. It does require more management because you've got 2 species out there you're trying to manage. You are limited in what you can do for weed control because a lot of the seed producers are producing GMOs that are, they're Roundup ready, and they're bundling that in their alfalfa varieties. And even though we don't really need that here in New York, we can't get the varieties without it. Okay, so what are the most important factors? Soil drainage, favors alfalfa, okay. Soil pH favors alfalfa, okay. Potassium fertilizer, again, more favors the alfalfa. Manure application will push us more toward the grass. A nitrogen fertilizer will favor the grass. And the stand age, if it's an older stand, our older varieties are, the older it is, the more it'll favor the grass, because eventually the alfalfa will go out of there. But it's nice then to have that grass pasture that you may not have to do anything with for a while. So another thing we then want to do is evaluating the grass percent in the alfalfa mixtures. And we've tried various methods to evaluate this. I had one graduate student that he used facial recognition software to try and determine this. And it was really interesting, but I don't think it's something we could have passed on to producers or nutritionists or seed people to use, because it was very complicated. This was a real smart guy. I said, go ahead, Keenan, because it wasn't gonna, I couldn't understand most of it either. Now, as many of you know, visual estimation works very well with practice. We as scientists sometimes give you information that, okay, that works well, but you people that have been working out in the pastures and the hay fields and those sometimes know more than what we can tell you, or a machine can tell you, because you've been out there long enough that you know your fields and you know when they're ready. But we would like to help you some. Okay. My husband had a student that we wanted to estimate what the total NDF of a stand of mixed alfalfa grass was, and when we would need to harvest it to get there. Now, if you're in pasture and you wanted a lower NDF, we've got that in there too, when to start, but we said we'd like it about 50%, or this was percent grass in the stand, and we did alfalfa height. The alfalfa height, 38.7 inches. We wanted it to go to 43.7. This is when the first bud stage. That told us we've got 6 days to harvest it. And what we can use this for is it can give us a few days to arrange, okay, which fields are we going to have to harvest first? Do I have time to go to my son's or daughter's wedding? Can I put it off for a day or two? Do I need to get it in before we get 3 days of rain? So there is some use to this, and some of these tools are up on our website, and it is calculated for you automatically. That website is Forages.org, and it was really an Excel sheet that we got it in there. Okay, now when I look at objectives for alfalfa, fescue, research for dairy and cubes, meadow fescue, we want to evaluate the grass species, the variety, and the seeding rates for achieving a 20 to 30% grass mixture when we first seed it, because we found that if you get much higher than that, the grass does take over. That's one of the reasons we were looking at meadow fescue as well, because it is not quite as aggressive as the fescue was. And then we also wanted the highest quality grass so we could get that digestibility in there. So we had 19 meadow fescues, one tall fescue that we seeded with about 2 pounds per acre. And we looked at the grass mixture, and this is up in northern New York. This is around Ithaca, which is in central New York. And we looked at the percent grass in the alfalfa mixtures after it got established in the first year. And this was a meadow fescue that was found in on a farmer's field in Wisconsin and developed. But you can see there's a large range of the percent grass in the stand. And when we're getting up this high, this is not what we want. So one of the things was, were we seeding too high, which we also looked at, and it appears that 1 pound maybe was a little better for our area. We like to harvest usually mid to a little later in May for our spring seedings of grass. So, but we took a whole bunch of these and we looked at it, and the NDF in our grass was about where we wanted it. Our suggestion is when you're harvesting when you have a mixed meadow or a mixed field, that you're going to have to manage for the way that it is. And after a year after seeding, when you have a little bit more grass, you may want to manage for the grass. If you still have more alfalfa, you're probably going to manage for the alfalfa or maybe some other legume. So these were the dates in 2021. This was the percent mix. Okay, we didn't do well out in eastern New York. Our grass didn't get well established for this particular study. But this was the mix NDF here. Okay, and it was harvested just prior. Sorry, people. My students know me as the electronic dodo bird of the instructors at Cornell. So this was just prior to field harvest, and sometimes we were just ahead of the field harvester or the silage trucks when we were doing this. So it was on a farmer's field, and you could see that we have really low NDF on these fields. We had pretty good yields. Question for you to answer is, reduced lignin alfalfa going to matter here? Okay. Now, for us, the answer was no, but there are considerations for reduced lignin. And I'll let other people talk to you about that. But we did some more studies here with different varieties again. And so grass species selection does matter, okay? Because we want to keep, alfalfa selection matters also. We want to keep that 20 to 50% of our range, okay? Okay, in a mixed stand. We never want it to get much above 50% if we're trying to get real high yields, although as the stand gets older, it will get more grass. Okay. As low as 5% of any grass will increase the NDF digestibility of alfalfa grass mixture 1%. So this is really important if you're trying to get your intake up. Dry matter yield is correlated with grass. Okay, you kind of know that. Hot weather favors alfalfa. Okay, that taproot's going to help. So we need to make sure that we have moisture, hopefully for 1 month post planting, or our summer seeding of grass may not work so well. Okay, now I hope maybe you pick something up so that your forage can have a better use than this, although sometimes, especially if you're looking at it from the animal's point of view, this may be the best way to use the forage. We have a program in Forages.org that helps you pick a species depending on what your use is. This is lactating dairy cows, but it comes back with different varieties that you should be using. In this particular field, it did not recommend any legume. It did, it said it's acceptable, but our, our tonnage wasn't great. We want you to buy a high quality seed. The seed's cleaner, okay? The variety is pure, so you kind of have less variability. You can take advantage of the new genetics, and you can maximize other inputs. I've talked a lot about hay and hay fields, but we actually do have a lot of pastures in New York, and it's a growing area once again. We'd like you to plant a diverse mixture. The mixtures can typically withstand a lot more stress, and depending on your use, that mixture can be made for different classes of livestock. As I said, if you have a species of grass or legume, if you're going to have a good thing with it, there will be some bad with it. So you have a lot of choices you can make. No perfect species, no supergrass, no single best choice. And each one has its own management requires. If you mess this up, you'll have some very ugly pastures. So you have, again, a lot of species choices. This may vary a little bit where you are. Any pasture should, or any forage program should be based on cool season temperates. And where do you get information? Your surroundings, neighbors' fields that seem to be working, trial and error, pasture walks and meetings, the type of meetings that these people are putting on here. And we don't recommend common seed. We'd like you to use certified seed. Okay, how do you choose? If we have a variety that was developed in Maryland, it may not work for you. Okay, where was it evaluated and under what environmental conditions? Ask, get yourself some knowledge on it. All right, thank you. I think you've been a very good audience. Since I haven't seen any images of tomatoes or anything thrown at the screen, so I want to thank you. The funding for our studies was provided by the U.S. Alfalfa Farmer Research Initiative and the New York Farm Viability and Northern New York programs. But I want to again thank the sponsors of this program and for being invited here by Amafra, and I hope I said that right. And I've enjoyed being in Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cherney. We do have a few questions coming in, and also anyone who has questions, please throw them in the chat and I will field them for you. So the first question I wanted to ask is, are you noticing a shift amongst New York farmers in terms of how much grass they're growing, whether that's the amount of grass in mixes or the amount of grass, like pure stands of grass that's being grown?
I don't know, because like I said, 85% of our farmers have already used it. We do notice that they've switched in varieties, and we're hoping, since we've been 30 years here, and he's the forage extension person and I'm the nutritionist for forages, we hope that these changes have been influenced by us because they're taking our recommendations and not going strictly against us. So yeah, you know, they did put more fescue in for the grasses. They have looking more at this meadow fescue. So they do seem to be following those recommendations, but we still don't have an alfalfa that'll grow in rocks very well. So yeah, they're remaining mixed, but they seem to be listening to what we're saying, at least for now.
So what's the effect of increasing the percentage of grass in the alfalfa stand on the protein content of the forage?
Okay, now the big thing is maturity. If you harvest young grass, or at the time we want you to harvest it, it may bring the protein a little bit down, but it's still going to be in that 18 to 20% range. Okay, so we're talking, you're still got a very good crop. Okay, and it does change. Maybe you'll be able to use a little, I don't know. It does change the other mixture a little bit, but it's still a very high protein forage.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is timing of harvest has a bigger impact on the protein content. So we should probably go check out some of those tools on forage.org.
Yes,
Okay.
forages.org.
Forages.org, plural. Okay, forages.org.
Yeah, I looked at your webpage, and I did notice that you also have some publications out there on when to harvest and things like that as well. So yeah, maturity, harvesting at the right time is going to have a huge impact on a lot of things, not just on that particular crop, but the remaining harvests and maybe what happens to your field in the following years if it's a mixed field, because if you abuse one or the other, you're going to maybe lose the grass or lose the alfalfa.
So when you're developing a ration that includes a higher proportion of grass, are you noticing differences in palatability or in intake?
Again, because we use mostly TMRs, we actually could have a little maybe higher intake with the higher grasses, but we're seeing, because we fix the ration so it meets the requirements we think the cows want, we haven't seen a problem with palatability, because again, we said they're not grazing it, they're not being fed it alone, and if it's as silage, they don't seem to have a problem with it anyway. But certainly when it's a TMR, don't seem to have any problems with it.
All right. Okay, so this is a question about harvesting mixed species stands. Which of the species are you aiming to oh, okay, I see. So if you're trying to harvest a mixed stand and trying to pick the best time
Yeah.
to harvest it, should you be focusing on maximizing quality or maximizing yield? Because the grass and the alfalfa are typically not perfectly ready at the exact
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah, that's one of the things we've been working on, is trying to have varieties that match up first off. But to answer your question, you cannot lose more than about 12% yield and go for the quality. So, but you don't want to go for maximum yield for sure, because we've picked that quality that we want, and that's where you want to go. Because if you get much higher than that, what happens is you get on your quality, and then you start to have problems. So I guess it's a mix. It depends is the favorite answer I give my students, but really, once you pick that NDF you want to harvest at, that's going to be where you want to harvest at, and you don't want to harvest it before that, because you are going to be affecting the yield quite a bit, and that extra quality isn't what you really wanted. And if you go much over than that, it's affecting quality in a negative way, and that extra yield doesn't help you that much. So I hope that kind of answered your question. So you have to kind of know in advance where it is. And we're saying if you have more than 50% grass, you manage your harvest for the grass. If you have more than 50% alfalfa, you manage for the alfalfa. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. Like, I took from that, pick your quality target and then figure out whether you have more grass or more alfalfa and manage from there. That's what I took from your answer.
Yeah.
Okay. So the research that you guys are doing at Cornell is focused a lot on alfalfa and meadow fescue. Are there more plans to evaluate those fescues in a North American environment? Because I know you mentioned there's a ton of fescues in Europe. There's not a lot here. Is that on the to-do list?
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, we are keeping a look, because we know that there can't be just one, and as more develop, we would like to see more come in. We are starting to see some other researchers in other parts of the country look at that a little bit. And our plans would include looking at different species and varieties. And we do keep an eye out for new varieties of existing plants, or maybe a new grass out there that's coming from someplace else that we can match up with the queen of forages, alfalfa. We want the king of grass to match it really well. And up where you are, it might be a little different, the one that you would want to pick. So
we tend to be, especially Eastern Ontario tends to be very similar to New York in a lot of ways. So it's great to hear what you guys are doing. I think we've got time for one more question. Okay. So as a nutritionist, if you're trying to feed grasses in your rations, do you prefer a forage that has one grass in it, or a forage that has a few grasses in it? Forget the agronomy. Your husband deals with the agronomy.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was going to say if you are
Would you
If you
prefer?
are on pasture, you want it to be several species, okay? And they're you know, a mix, including legumes. If as a nutritionist, it's a little bit easier to do it with just one because you don't get the variability. So,
All right.
but I'm half agronomist. I'm not quite half agronomist, so I can't completely forget that. But if you can tell me what the quality is, I can come up with a ration for you. But it would be easier if it's just one grass.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cherney, for speaking to us today. I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to Terry, and he's going to wrap up with some final comments.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cherney. That was excellent. And thanks for sharing some of your expertise with us today. Thanks again to our sponsors for supporting these webinars. Without you, this would not be possible to put this together, and hope to see everyone here again tomorrow. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.